Last of the Wakeful Dreamers. Occasionally, Asperity Monsequana recalled dreams as vivid and banal as her conscious hours. Usually, if she could manage it, and the universe typically conspired to make it so, she would try to enact those dreams, retracing her nocturnal steps in her waking life. Hidden dimensions of the dream's significance would then become apparent, perhaps through a seemingly chance encounter with a hummingbird that reminded her of her connection with Sorsajna, the fire at the heart of existence. At the very least, it would wrap a numinous afterglow around an otherwise dull morning. Her last dream before arising this autumn morning led her to Farsalane's museum and library. Asperity didn't expect to discover anything significant within its comprehensive collection of books and scrolls. After all, they contained no messages the cordon did not sanctify, no stories that did not constitute part of the mythos that the city mothers and fathers sought to perpetuate. But that was a moot point. The young Shani knew that emulating a dream's footsteps could lead her to omens, messages, and unseen nudges the cordon was unaware of and could never hope to control. The first of those footsteps had brought her here. And so, with twists of sometimes comical and sometimes disconcerting déjà vu, she revisited a cubby filled with parchments inscribed during Ophia's 6th season. She positioned herself to mirror her recollected dream body as she grazed her hands across the supple vellum. Then she was distracted by the rhythmic clip-clap of knobbed wood upon the smooth marble floor. Peering around a corner, she sought its source. An elderly woman now sat at one oval table, looking uncomfortable in the smooth spoon-shaped seat like it was made for younger bones than hers, a newer generation that disdained her own. She huddled within a thick patchwork cloak of topaz and forest green. A thick, knobbed staff, plumed with peacock feathers, leaned against her chair. Asperity drew back with a hiss as her surroundings jogged a memory that momentarily drove the older woman from her thoughts. Papa had been in her dream, too, during the only portion that seemed too fantastical to be an ordinary sunlit event. They'd walked along Farsalane's outskirts until they reached the river. Somehow, they parted there, winding up on opposite banks. Asperity kept shouting to Pallades, but his eyes were fixed and unwavering, much like the obsessions that ruled his waking life. It didn't occur to the young woman that she had to leave the library immediately, until she realized it was too late. Pallades, city father of the cordon, entered at the double doors. Fortunately, in this material echo of the dream, Asperity was not the object of his attention. Seizing upon this unexpected brush of serendipity, she darted back to the cubby and stood with her back to the oval chamber. A couple of tall, potted ferns shielded her from Papa's primary line of sight. Asperity doubted that sacred timbre could grant anyone invisibility. One couldn't simply exchange a body's fleshy garments for wind or silence. When necessary, though, she could draw from that inner wellspring those notes she required to render herself unobtrusive, easily overlooked. She'd had extensive training in that discipline. So much of her life had taught her the merits of being unseen. She sensed her papa approaching the older woman. A quick glance revealed his chiseled face and his backbone's stiff righteousness. Pallades had donned a tight leather tunic and skirt of overlapping rawhide leaves, an outfit Pharsalian soldiery favored. His eager strides parted the air like all atmospheres were his natural estate, and he spoke without greeting or preamble. If not for the legends that still cling to your name, Shayakokwi, I would have rejected your request outright. You know what we face in this city, what all of Ophia faces. Frivolity is a luxury no city father can afford. Then it's fortunate for you, father, that I've come for no frivolous reason, the woman said. Her voice's cool but forceful susurration belied her apparent age. And maybe you hearken to me now, not in homage to a legend, but rather because you seek counsel at the behest of a wiser part of you. The sovereign order provided one of the great pillars of our knowledge. No one denies that. We will not fail to. Let's bypass these honoraries, Father Pallades, she said, knocking on the marble 3 times with her stick for emphasis. Hear instead the urgings of an old woman who has nothing to gain from deceiving you. I know you plan to intercept the Chanan army at Ardid with something direr than a host of mercenaries and châtain steel. Pallades stiffened as if he'd been struck. By what means do you know? Divination? Spying? The lore masons he'd sent with the host were arrayed like common foot soldiers. Surely no civilian could discern the difference. Tut tut. Now who's getting us mired in frivolities? We have no time for this. I know well enough what you and your fellow mothers and fathers intend. You would utilize sacred timbre to drown the continental bridge as the Chanans march along its spine. For the sake of Ophia, for the sake of Earth entire, you must desist. The decision is not mine alone to make, Pallades said, smoothing over his reaction with practiced poise. But even if it were, I would not choose otherwise. The Chanans do not possess our lore and might, but they compensate for those inadequacies with sheer numbers. Ours is the feller hand, regardless, but this way we can spare countless Ophian lives. They could be spared without calamity if you led them to the underground refuges, El Makora, Shayakokwi said. Oh, I understand the strategic sense of what you're doing well enough. With one stroke, you could eradicate your enemy with no casualties. Only there would be a casualty, Pallades, the integrity of Ophia's balance. You cannot rouse the invisible forces of life on such a scale without dire consequences. Have the storms and upheavals you've already witnessed not taught you this? The cordon, well, you seek to contain the forces you unleash, which is like trying to contain all the steam from an evaporated lake inside a glass jar. And with the lore masons to funnel it, sacred timbre can turn nature herself into a weapon more devastating than anything we've witnessed, worse than all the Sanjay Sotas in history. Ophia has many agencies to maintain her balance, but she cares for all her creatures. If we unleash her forces, we'll have to contend with the repercussions just as the Chanans do. Nothing within Sorsajna will take sides in a conflict between humans. I tell you, there are other ways to meet threats than using sacred timbre to destroy armies. If you pursue that course, well, that kind of fire burns even the hand of the wielder. Pallades seemed to hear only the portions of her argument that eroded his sense of rectitude. Maybe that was true for the old practitioners of your order, but we've progressed significantly since those nascent days. He swept a hand to encompass the library shelves. Perhaps you should delve into the records and make your knowledge contemporary. Oh, I doubt that human motivation has changed much since I last researched it, dear father, Xiaokokwi said. Know this, to the extent that any beings forget that the world is their mirror, they'll rely increasingly upon tools to manipulate and control that world. Sacred timbre is the ultimate expression of this. It's given you all the keys to life and death. And you think that the cordon can arbitrate this? That any city mother or father can shoulder that responsibility? I certainly don't believe that my old order is beyond reproach. But if there's one thing of which I'm proudest, the Sophrines, you can scour your histories and verify this. She waved towards the same rows of books he'd indicated a moment before. We never pitted ourselves against. We didn't have enemies. We aimed to embody what we were for and did not oppose. And that is the message I most want to convey to you now. When you embrace the way of violence, the consequences are never one-sided. Rendering Ophia herself a weapon? Who among us is possibly far-sighted enough to guess where the reverberations might end? Too long have we ceded the sunlit lands to the primitives, Pallades argued. You forget the threats that necessitated the formation of the cordon in the first place. You forget Sanjay Sota and his horde. We do not have the luxury to choose who our enemies will or won't be. And we are the protectors of the Shani, our people. We are entrusted with preserving our way of life. To that end, we will bring every available resource to bear. Your vulnerability, sir, was never due to a lack of power, Xiaokokwi said. It is lack of comprehension that foils the cordon. We will bring the storms under control, and the invaders, just as we brought this city and the hives in line, Pallades said. There is naught in nature that cannot be harnessed, and, as you yourself have admitted, we possess the keys now. We have an advantage that our forefathers and mothers never dreamed of. We've ushered in an era of peace for the first time in Shani history. Even our children can learn how to manifest their heart's desires. My gifts run along administrative rather than prescient lines, he admitted, with a stray note of longing, almost regret. I would leave the broader vision of Ophia's future to more imaginative minds than mine. But all Shani, regardless of their position, can be eased now that the weaving connects nearly all parts of the capital. Soon it will bind all of Ophia, a ubiquitous protecting presence. Asperity fought down a smile, noticing how Papa swelled with pride, straightening as his mind projected grandeur beyond the library walls. He sought to convey that awe to Xiaokokwi, just as he had often tried to impress it upon his daughter. And Xiaokokwi, hearing him speak with such conviction, said, "Maybe I've mistaken the purpose of my mission today. I'd thought to walk into Farsalane and deliver the cordon a message, or perhaps the real lesson here is for me." Then she braved the father's probable wrath. Like most leaders who veered onto destructive paths, Pallades, you do not perceive yourself as evil. I've no doubt of that. Much the opposite. You're driven by ideals, just as I am. You pursue your goals, or so you think, in the service of all humanity. Watching him bristle, she relished a grin. Perhaps I give you too much credit. I should say, for the sake of all Shaney kind. But my point is this. I suspect that your ambitions originate from good intent. Pallades seemed to be fighting an urge to spit in the woman's face. Such rank condescension. I should have listened to my first instinct and not bothered with you. I concede that the sovereign's legacy must be respected, crone, but your arts are antiquated and redundant. His face twisted with an acquired repugnance towards all things mystical. What need have we for wakeful dreamers? We possess the means to mold the very fabric of reality to the shape of our visions. Asperity watched as Papa spun on his heels and strode towards the door. Shiakokwi's shout halted him before he reached it. You need dreams to show you the shape of the precipice you race towards, Father. But this appeal only delayed Pallades' departure long enough for the man to shrug, as if in response to a ghost of regret. The sense of something within this moment demanding my attention is more insistent now, Shiakokwi mused, with the affected air of a stage performer amid a soliloquy. I chastised myself for not identifying it before. It's the girl lingering in the shadows, trying to be invisible. Pallades' daughter. Am I so distraught and distracted that I forget a half-dozen dreams? Then she called out in a more natural cadence. All right, girl, he's gone. You can quit hiding in the alcove. You are his daughter, aren't you? She added, implying she already knew the answer. Emerging almost against her will, Asperity was heartened, enough to soften her scowl, to see that she and the strange woman were alone in the library now. Indeed, I am the daughter of a city father, she said, by which I mean more a father to the city than to me. But it pained her to be so critical, and she couldn't sustain her ire. Ignore that. I'll not speak ill of a man who's not here to defend himself. Shiakokwi smiled at the young woman's spirit. In this age of the weaving's ever-tightening web, courage was required to speak aloud thus. Did she perhaps trust that her surviving parents' influence could keep her safe where others were not? But no, her timbre implied no sense of protection. What is your name, child? That question dragged a reply like a bird's beak drags a worm from its muddy refuge. Asperity Monsequana. Once Farsalane became New Ophia's capital, messengers were sent to all the outlying hives, urging Shaney to forsake their ancestral homes and seek sanctuary in the ruling city. Then came the new edicts. Families would be given new names, divorcing them from their hives of origin. But I will not submit to whatever new identity the Cordon has in mind for me, Asperity vowed. Sequana meant more to her heart than any family ties anyway. Her loyalties were bound to its memory, not the Cordon's imperial dreams. Asperity? Shiakokwi quipped, curling an eyebrow. Not typically, I like to think, Asperity said, unless you get me talking about Papa. Oh, you're a sharp one. The older woman's smile widened in appreciation. Asperity probed her with raven eyes. Sharp enough to guess that you are indeed a Sophrine, the one the rhymes mention, the last one left. This gave Shiakokwi pause. What betrayed the fact? You've never been in this city before. That much is obvious. And yet you move and apprehend everything as if testing it against old memories. Your waking eyes soak up the sights as if gauging how closely they resemble what your inner eyes envisioned. And Sophrines are the only Shani I've ever heard of or read about who dream so deeply and lucidly. You've obviously given the matter a great deal of thought, Shiakokwi said, again reassessing this interaction. Dream memories were beginning to clarify within her inner mind, exposing its hitherto unseen dimensions. They feel like kindred, my people, Asperity said, astonished to hear herself sound so forthright. I've learned as much as possible, which is not easy, particularly now, but it always seemed to me that if there's any way the shadows of our time could be confronted, the answers lie within the sovereign lore. Shiakokwi waved towards the bookshelves. You speak of learning. How fared you today? Did you find what you were seeking? Asperity stared back, swaying with ambivalence. Part of her wanted to end this conversation. She could feel bat-winged phantoms beating at its edges. I spent most of the last 2 years here, she said, voice carefully dispassionate. If I want to read something, I know where to find it. You don't sound particularly impressed by the selection. Almost involuntarily, Asperity stepped closer, unaware of how her hands began cavorting. I'm grateful to have read some of these books. Most of the others are self-congratulatory. They laud the achievements of our civilization like it's superior to all that preceded it. We've ushered in an era of peace for the first time in recorded history, Shiakokwi suggested, echoing Paladi's line. Please don't patronize me. It's obvious to anyone with eyes and ears that we've unleashed forces that can't be contained or even directed by this order of which we are so proud. You spoke the truth there. Shiakokwi, sensing the necessity for a test, swept a hand along one of the library's walls. I have often visited a storehouse of knowledge wherein all this would scarcely comprise a broom closet. Asperity flashed narrow, dubious eyes. No such place exists, not on this side of the partition. Maybe you speak of, oh, but that's just a myth. Yet her certainty teetered. Isn't it? The sentient library? I should hope it is a substantial place, as I've spent the better part of my life demarking its boundaries. Asperity brightened momentarily, but then seemed to recall a protective cynicism. If I've learned anything from the time I've spent here, there are some questions for which knowledge alone is no answer. Oh, I couldn't agree more. But what if it was a living record? Shiakokwi indicated the books again. What if you could interact, actually engage in dialogue with the authors of these works? What if you could learn to access whatever knowledge was most pertinent to you in the moment? Would that bring you closer to the answers you sought? Perhaps, Asperity considered. But then I think our challenges now have no precedent. Of what use are the lessons of the past? Suddenly, her face darkened as if premonitions eclipsed its inner light. Usually, when someone goes into exile voluntarily, like you did, it's a bad sign when they suddenly emerge again. Shiakokwi pursed rueful lips. I wish I could claim to be the exception. You heard me arguing with your father. I do not deliver such warnings blithely. But consider our exchange a mere token protest on my part. I didn't expect to achieve much by speaking with him. Such rectitude is not easily dissuaded. She rose from the chair and leaned against her staff with a dour grunt. Leaping to the most salient point, let's say I came here searching for an apprentice. Specifically, for you. Unconsciously, Asperity made a series of hand signs. The cordon would never allow Sophrine to teach in this city. I'm amazed they've allowed us to converse like this for as long as we have. Shiakokwi smiled and, employing the same hand language, said, "Do you remember where you learned to sign like that?" "I don't," Asperity whispered, astonished by her gulf of ignorance. Indeed, the more she thought about it, the more unattainable the feat seemed. And yet, it was accomplished effortlessly through bodily memory when she paid no attention to the process. "It's as if I learned it in my sleep," she finished partly to herself. She glanced at her hands like they were trained animals that had performed an unexpected trick. "What if you're in the midst of another lesson right now?" Shiakokwi signed. "What?" Asperity whipped her head about as if she expected the library's walls to ripple and dissolve, the floor to undulate like tempest waves. "Remarkable." Shiakokwi's eyes shone with evident pride. "You skipped past a dozen logical transitions to arrive at the most pertinent question. What if this is all a dream?" Asperity, angered by her previous startlement, signed, "That was not very courteous. You knew how I was going to react." "Rather than knew, let's say I hoped. But was I truly uncourteous, I would glean what I wished to know of you by following your thought stream. You do very little to guard it, you know. I wasn't aware there was such a need." Asperity felt wary now, almost cornered. "There isn't," Shiakokwi assured her. "One of the things you will discover about the Sovereign arts is they're difficult to misuse in that way. Usually, when one has acquired the means, one no longer has the desire. Unlike what's contained in these books, Sovereign knowledge changes you on the inside." She clapped her hands together loud enough to create echoes in the alcoves, and then let them convey her meaning. "You'll learn much more if you consent to follow me." "Follow you to where?" "To my home, of course. You said you've always been curious about the Sovereign art. I will grant you your wish. I will train you." Shiakokwi glanced about as if sniffing the air, "But we'll need to leave swiftly." "Leave? What, now? I don't recall saying I intended to go anywhere with you." "There's no time for this, child. Come now. You're stifled in your life here. You've all but said as much. Your father doesn't support you. I dare say you've few friends. You conceal your true gifts for fear their light will betray you. It doesn't need to be this way." "I may be frustrated with Papa," Asperity admitted, "but he is my only family." She did not add that sometimes his proximity made her uncomfortable for reasons she dared not explore. "As for everyone else here, they are still my people. I can't." She stumbled. She dreamed of flight so often, but now, as the opportunity opened up, she felt engulfed by a kind of sadness she couldn't account for. Where does this misplaced sense of loyalty come from? "This city is doomed, child," Shiakokwi signed. "I speak with the certainty of vision. If you really want to liberate your people, I think you have a better chance of convincing them of wonder and possibility on the farther side of the partition. You have a better chance of convincing them to relinquish the old ways, leading them all to destruction. Better there than here. Here you can do nothing but wither in desperation. She emitted a low grumble of repudiation. I can't imagine how you've endured it here for so long to begin with. Right beneath the cordon's nose. Asperity was so absorbed in the content of their exchange that it took her a moment to realize her own astonishment. They'd communicated with hand signs again. How did she understand what all the motions signified? Shiakokwi, noting the young woman's startled comprehension, signed, "You've recalled some more of your nightly lessons, I see." She pursued this vein. "I imagine my first task must be to help you learn to trust yourself again. Oh, it's quite obvious what you've been up to, trying to blend in with every other sleepwalker in the city, making yourself appear unremarkable, beneath notice, so that your father would pay you no special heed, so he wouldn't try to groom you for his path. Nay, I don't criticize, child. Don't scowl at me so. I participated in some of those dreams wherein you worked out your methods of secrecy and concealment, where you chose this hour and place to share your plans with me." "Plans?" Asperity visibly paled. "Oh yes, to speak after your father met with me and departed with his thoughts in frustrated disarray. To remain in this library while the cordon take their midday meal in the tower. And such is the moment we meet in waking, communicating in the circumspect way we've long prepared. Do you call this all accidental?" "I call it your planning, not mine." Shiakokwi shook her venerable, doleful head. "You see, much has been lost. If you camouflage your inner knowledge for long enough, it becomes concealed even from yourself. Thrice before we've met like this in dreams," she said. She opted not to mention that the recollection was new even for her. "Does some part of you not want to remember? Wherever we were, whatever the circumstances, you beseeched me, forsooth, practically begged me, to teach you. Make me a sovereign." Asperity gasped, to the extent that such a reaction could be conveyed with her hands. "You must have misunderstood. What kind of fey mood could have moved her to ask for such a boon, assuming the woman's assertion was true?" She reached for a point of stability and grasped naught but unresponsive silence. She was adrift like a phantom in a city that was foreign to her even after 2 years of brute toleration, and would likely remain so forever. She felt more estranged from its citizens by the day. "I was only curious," she muttered in a voice diminished by the weight of these realizations. Persisting with hand signs, she added, "This is not a conversation we want to be witnessed by the weaving." She already felt agitated enough to send ripples through its web. Shiakokwi responded in kind. "For most of your life, I've suspected that you carry the gift. I asked how you've endured this environment, but I know where you found solace. On the other side of the partition. Is that the only thing that's important to you in all of this?" Asperity asked. "Just finding someone to whom you can pass down your knowledge?" "Child, the sovereign lore may be the only thing that ensures that any of us survive. We can't fight our age's shadows in their surface manifestations. We must confront them in the causal place, wither them at the roots. You're appalled by the state to which your people have descended. You abhor the rules that your father has adopted and enforced. But can you not see that he doesn't comprehend any other way? He aches to take a hand in creating a new world as much as you do, but he doesn't possess your vision. A new world, Asperity breathed. This provoked an unsettling idea, and she remembered to convey it without speaking aloud. If what I've read about the sovereign way is true, and time really is an open ocean on the other side of the partition, then you must have had some glimpses of our future. Probable futures, Shiakokwi clarified. All right, but is that something you would share with me? I can do you one better than that. I can help you glimpse it for yourself. That might even be necessary. Necessary for my training? Aye. It'll likely galvanize your resolve or convince you that this path is not for you. Asperity drew breath and realized in that moment how resolved she'd already become. And if I realize I've got nothing to come back to, then this will help you understand what you've committed yourself to. A fly can't help his brother out of the spider's web if he's caught in it himself. Come, child. You wrestle with a decision that a wiser part of you has already made. I won't make you think like a member of the Cordon. I haven't appointed myself the custodian of power, believing no one else can be trusted with it. Besides, our universe has a way of humbling sophrines who try to curtail another's freedom. Remember what I said about the web. We each spin our own. Usher of the dawn, so my dreams name you. But if you disdain that title, well, you can find your place here easily enough. Simply kowtow to all the dictates of the Cordon. And no one knows them better than you, living under a city father's roof. But if you did that, you would feel alone as any hermit, though you were surrounded by 50,000 men and women who aspired to the same goals as you. Give old Shiakokwi this much of a chance. My home is a blind spot in the weaving's eye, deliberately so, and I've left my horse by the quays. If I have still failed to convince you by the time we reach her, you can turn around and step right back in line, and no one will question you. But if there's anything within you that longs for what I'm offering, this is your one opportunity. It will not stay open much longer. I'm offering you a way out of the spider's web. Shiakokwi led Asperity to a grassy court flanked by neat rows of poplars that afforded Farsalane's citizens a pristine view of the city's central pyramid. The monolith's 6 million tons of granite, latticed with ornate designs in quartz, copper, and gold, culminated in a golden house-sized apex, its needlepoint sparkling almost 500 feet above the barren plateau upon which it sat. The two absorbed its magnitude, in physical immensity and numinous stature, in silence for a while. Then Shiakokwi spoke. If you allow me to, I will teach you the internal order of events. Then you will find you are not easily deceived by falsehood and charades. One has no masks within the dream environment, and once you've grown acclimated to this, the masks of the waking world are a thin veneer indeed. Watching the edifice with misting eyes, Asperity gradually grew aware of how alone she and Shiakokwi were. The sand at the monument's feet was disturbed by naught but the wind. Behind her, beyond the base of the slope, Farsalane's denizens scurried with furtive backs and downcast eyes. Workers in tough leather garb, traders in tan tunics and turbans, visiting dignitaries and cordon functionaries in colorful silken pantaloons and sleeveless shirts and blouses, all moved as if they carried secrets to a shadowy tryst. Shiakokwi addressed her unspoken thoughts, invoking the pyramid's now obscure name. They used to gather at Perzora's feet and feel its subtle chimes. Now they fear its eye will expose them, that it will condemn them for the uses to which they put it. Beat a dog enough times and it may become a killer, but you may also find yourself on the receiving end of its fangs. You live within a city of contrived illusions, child. But comprehend the internal order I spoke of, and everything becomes clear to your inner eyes. Even questions such as, how did our ancestors achieve such a construction as this? You'll realize that everything in your world on either side of the partition, waking or dreaming, serves as your mirror, and thus life is never coercive. You don't look for answers outside yourself because you possess an internal oracle. Eyes still fixed upon the pyramid, uncluttered by nostalgia for what her ancestors had wrought, Asperity's voice emerged small and forlorn. And until I learn to hear this oracle, my place will be just to listen and learn. Why should Sorsajna find my voice less worthy than any others? The universe can deliver the message you require from myriad mouthpieces, Shiakokwi allowed. Then, wrenching her eyes from the edifice and noticing her young companion's intimidation, she said, "Close your eyes, child." Asperity was so startled by this sudden demand that she shuddered and glared back at the older woman, but persuasion thrummed within Shiakokwi's voice. The woman had mentioned coercion. How did this differ? But Asperity probed deeper and sensed a timbre of compassion which, she reasoned, could not be faked. One had to feel it to mimic it. Thus reassured, momentarily, she closed out the exterior world behind the veil of her eyelids and did as Shiakokwi bid. Once she'd done so, she heard the woman's hypnotic monotone reaching her as if from a distant shore. Now, you see yourself in a classroom within Farsalane University. But this is the classroom of your formative years. Lessons that carved your thinking and behavior into predictable furrows were received here. But hearken, you see now that your chair faces the opposite direction. It is turned towards what was once the back of the room. Everything you learn now runs contrary to what you were once taught. Comprehension moves in the opposite direction. As if responding to unseen and unheard cues, Asperity opened her eyes and saw the Sophrine woman beaming with satisfaction. "How quick you are to accept this new orientation," Shiakokwi said. "Now, try not to second-guess yourself. Do not try to anticipate what kind of answer you think I'm looking for. Just tell me honestly, what do you see there?" She waved her peacock-plumed staff towards the towering pyramid. The answer came to Asperity at once. A weapon. Shiakokwi nodded as if her head was laden with the sorrows of generations. Swallowing hard through a rising lump, she said, "And yet, how can I reveal its original vision and purpose without rolling back the camouflage of time?" This marvel lent the ancient Shani their sense of identity and cosmic orientation. Such feats require a profound awareness of life's essence. Words are clumsy tools indeed. In my grandmother's time, to gaze upon the hive heart was to feel one's own heart inflamed. Though it was as magisterial and imposing as you see now, humor and gaiety danced within its light. All who looked upon it felt like they stood at the universe's navel, and that's as close to the truth of our being as any physical construct can ever embody. The woman's raw emotion pulled at Asperity more powerfully than any of her previous arguments. Under its spell, the Great Pyramid suddenly appeared to her like the culmination of all her papa's mad, imperialistic dreams, a sand castle waiting to be demolished by the waves of time. Her response was so visceral that it forced her to compromise without weighing possible consequences. "All right, you've convinced me, for now. I will give your way a chance." Welcome to the mythic story cycle I call Parting the Veils. I'm Seth Mullins, your narrator and author for this video and all the others on this channel. If you enjoy the world I'm creating here, liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing really helps me out and inspires me to keep going with this. Thank you. Construction's timbre, subliminally humming throughout Farsalane for the last 5 years, was only now beginning to subside. The physical composition of the city had begun to mirror its inner stasis. Nearly all living quarters were uniform in size, layout, and beige coloration, extending at least a mile in every direction from the hive heart, the Great Pyramid. Streets, houses, and establishments were indistinguishable, and the city's grand design ensured that the shadow of the tall octagonal tower that housed the cordon to the pyramid's north side would fall upon every house at some hour or another on any sunlit day. But Farsalane's grid loosened as Asperity and Shiakokwi drew closer to the western quays. It would be some time before the riverside neighborhoods reflected the rigid, efficient spread of the city proper. Asperity recalled how Papa subconsciously tensed whenever she and he entered this unsystematic sprawl, as he called it. Its peculiar architecture and composition reflected its residents' tenuous adherence to the ideals of the cordon. Some buildings, closer to shanties than houses, wavered slightly, as structures tended to when transforming timbres were at work. The fact that the transformation was incomplete meant that the residents resisted such changes. They raised contrary vibrations. Such people had been known to simply disappear. Shani vanished. They were taken without trial or even formal charges. Minor uprisings were swiftly stamped out, leaving no survivors. Considering the Cordon's monstrous hubris, Shiakokwi commented, as if picking up the trail of Asperity's thoughts, I'm surprised your father did not imprison me or merely dismiss me as a crazed old woman. Other mothers and fathers might have detained me or driven me forth. She snorted, but I've grown accustomed to such a pathetic welcome from the civilized world. It was little different in the half-dozen hives I visited en route to the capital. Asperity squinted at her companion and ascertained her words' deeper import. Shiakokwi's devotion to the sovereign way had so profoundly shaped her nature that commoners could discern the difference. She was a stranger, a disruptor of convention, a breaker of paradigms. Whenever she moved within human-made structures, their foundations shifted uneasily. Even a man like Pallades, insulated by political power, could instinctively sense the threat she represented. Soon, Farsalane's buildings, even the Cordon's central spire, which loomed taller than the pyramid, faded behind them. Natawe River's scent and sun-speckled gaiety reached Asperity like a water nymph's chortle. Shiakokwi led her to a horse tethered near a wide pier. The brown mare had a stripe resembling a streak of whitewash running from forehead to nose. She looked hale and well-fed. Stella here will take us into the district by the wharves, where Farsalane's wall is still incomplete, Shiakokwi remarked. Then the woman handed Asperity a stick the length and width of her pointer finger. On closer inspection, it looked like several kinds of dried leaves wrapped and sealed together with brown gum. What is this? Asperity asked. I'll not lie. It is a narcotic, something to make you feel like you haven't a care in the world. You go ahead and chew on it slowly now. It isn't pungent. It tastes like cinnamon and cloves, but it's strong. Don't worry. She retrieved another stick from a pocket stitched in her patchwork cloak. I'll be joining you. As Asperity slowly chewed, trying to settle her misgivings, Shiakokwi patted her mare. We'll need only a portion of our wits for the journey. Stella knows how to guide us. You may not have felt it, but there are areas where the weaving is not as strong, not fully formed and tightened. It's an incomplete mesh. This leaves pathways that those with subtle senses can find. Our girl here will know which way to go, and will alert no one with our anticipations of the road ahead. Your father may not even think to look for you until after he gets home. As they mounted, Asperity already felt a warm sense of well-being growing within her, like when a pint of mead settles into the belly on a frigid night. But there was no attendant heaviness. A sense of ease and plenitude verging on complacency smoothed all the jarring edges of the horse's gait, making Asperity feel like she was swept by river currents. Few Shaney working at the docks, fishers and merchant river crews for whom the Natawe and Lenorian goods were life's blood, cast them a glance, though Asperity could feel their curiosity. If she and Shiakokwi were there on official business, well, commoners found trouble when they asked questions. And if they were not, Most would silently applaud such an act of defiance, even if they entertained little hope for it. And the city's garrison was thinned with so many soldiers marching north to safeguard the mouth of Ardid, in case the Chonin forces dared a winter crossing. Few were ever spared to patrol the riverside districts, where no threat was perceived. Farsalane's overconfidence is our ally this day, Asperity thought. Stella trotted along a packed dirt road concealed by lilies that reached no higher than her knees. Then, at Shiakokwi's whispered command, she leaped a gap in the stockade wall bordering the river, plunging chest high into the Natawe's water and foam. She immediately started paddling towards the farther shore, a motion that Asperity found not unlike her usual trot. By silent consent, she and Shiakokwi slid off opposite sides, clutched Stella's flanks, and pumped with their legs to ease their burden upon her. The mare was submerged to her chest now, but she was a strong swimmer, and Asperity felt how her aversion to the weaving's compulsion was stronger than her dislike of being wet. The river spilled into a flat, grassy marsh on the western side, and Stella regained her footing. Shiakokwi remounted, and as Asperity followed her example, the mare lifted her head and whinnied. "Our girl here knows the timbre of freedom," Shiakokwi shouted. The banks were gray clay beneath a layer of sand and cushioned with patches of yellow tule grass. Farther south, the water looked deeper. No eddies inhibited the river's course for as far as they could see. Slim clusters of black pine thrived alongside both banks. Here or there, willow or birch luxuriated in the sun, heedless of cordons, weavings, or Chonin invaders. Stella ushered the two Shani over a creaking, rustic gangway that Farsalane's mothers and fathers had obviously taken no hand in constructing. Asperity was relieved to notice no travelers. Most of Farsalane's traffic came from the bountiful province of Lenore to the north. A few score leagues to the south, one entered the verges of the Cowley rainforest. The taciturn folk dwelling beneath that thick canopy, Manitos and Junsas, had scant reason to love Shani, particularly now that their domain had fallen under Shatane's jurisdiction, and Jane Toe, their Shani governor, sent his messengers to Farsalane via underground routes that few knew about. The trees grew thickly along the bank, but the wood was not wide. Soon the companions emerged onto a brown prairie, which, Asperity knew, became a veritable quagmire when the infrequent but heavy spring and summer rains swelled the river. As the sedative Shiakokwi had given her exerted its lulling influence, Asperity's senses quested beyond their accustomed boundaries, redefining her reality with parameters that seemed divorced from any physical signposts. Even her mind's alliance with her body began to feel more of a guideline, a suggestion rather than a rock-bed fact. The sensation pushed her thoughts into unfamiliar terrain, provoking questions she'd never considered before. Why do we give it that name, timbre? For the ancients, was it a kind of music they made? Sacred timbre was based upon our understanding of how matter is the manifestation of ideas, Shiakokwi said. Leastways, that's how early Sophrines discovered and explained the concept. Every picture our eyes perceive mirrors a picture painted with the mind. She groped for a comparison. In the dreaming dimension, you see the proof at once, the evidence that your thoughts paint your world. It materializes before you. Now, there is what we could call an intermediate stage to this emergence that expresses itself in tones, but as you know, they're not tones you can hear with physical ears. They're felt. Over the hump of a small knoll, a road had been carved wide enough to accommodate a conestoga. The freshness of the hewn stumps suggested that the route was new. Asperity recalled her father effusing about opening up trade routes with the southern Osquai, who could be lured with shiny gemstones. These were as plentiful as coppers in Farcellane, and, in return, enrich Ophia with their exotic fruits and pelts. I'll use the immortal metaphor of the butterfly, Shiakokwi decided. The butterfly is a manifestation, as a tree or rock is. Liken it to water in motion and placid water. Mountains rising and mountains crumbling. The caterpillar would be the idea that seeks expression as that wave, placid lake, earthquake, or upheaval. Timbres are forms that ideas take in a kind of psychic chrysalis. They're transforming. They're being deciphered from their non-physical mental origins into physical objects and experiences. When I speak of root causes, she frowned momentarily. Do you mind if I change metaphors? Oh, by all means. Asperity, descending into an utterly careless mental state thanks to the herbal chew, capped her response with a giggle. All right, smelting, yes. Idea is the ore. Let's say it's gold ore. The manifestation is a gold ring. Sacred timbre is the forge, that inner space wherein we melt down the ore and shape it according to what we envision. Topping a small rise, they gazed over a hillside scourged by a recent fire whirl, another extreme weather anomaly that the cordon tried to pretend and convince the populace was commonplace in these parts. Bare, blackened pine trunks thrust upwards like charred pitchforks. However, the sister hill to their left was still lush and green, and a narrow waterway branching from the Natawe River meandered down to a small canoe-shaped valley. Now Stella pursued the timbre of freedom across a sun-dried ocean of grass and sand. And who does the shaping? Asperity asked. Who's the blacksmith? Haven't you been listening, child? We are. We plant our seeds there, and then, in the middle space, we tend to the budding crops. Here we reap our harvest, though we can never consciously understand how those seeds grow to flowers. You do realize you're on metaphor number 3 now, right? Shiakokwi grinned in wry appreciation. And, for the record, not that dreamers ever keep count, as a rule, this is the 4th time I've had to give you this lecture. So yes, tending crops. We do our work in that intermediate space, the garden, also referred to as the cocoon or the hammer and anvil. Asperity's mind skipped over the undercurrents there, feeling unready to face their implications. And how do we accomplish that? She asked instead. Well, the sophrine. Alright, do you prefer if we call it the kiln, the garden, or the cocoon? Asperity was then visited by a luminous recollection of her childhood in Sequana. I'm the kind of girl who likes to get her hands in the dirt. Let's stick with the garden. Very well. Sophrines can enter the garden in one of 2 ways, a waking trance or a dream. Then, They can weed the garden if it hasn't become too overgrown, or cultivate it if it isn't already parched and dead. That's the sovereign art, in essence. Sacred timbre specifically pertains to bridging that inner garden and physical life. Therein lies the problem. You see, as a tool, it enabled Shani to bring forth the forms they desired without understanding or seeing what was happening in the garden. You follow me? Only a portion of our being is material. Our bodies are expressions of consciousness, of what we are in spirit. We're the creators of our lives. Nothing happens to us by chance. There's nothing new about this philosophy, but self-knowledge is the key. We must comprehend the forces driving us. We need to know our motivations, beliefs, and fears. They foretell where the currents of our lives are sweeping us. We can use that understanding to alter the flow. So now we've moved on to a river, Asperity muttered, grinning. Number 4. Shiakokwi rolled on without hearing her. And so each of us directs our lives, regardless of whether we're aware of doing so or not, or whether or not we like the destination. Whenever we blame chieftains, chanans, or the cordon for our predicaments, we turn a blind eye to our power. We forget to tend the garden. And now we're back to number 3, Verity said with a low, languorous hum. She was set adrift for a while, pondering the implications of concepts that sounded foreign to her ears, even as another part of her seemed to absorb them with relish, as if she'd been waiting for someone to tell her such things her whole life. Towards evening, Shiakokwi's eyes brightened as she espied an opening at the foot of a 50-foot tall cliff. The bare hill seemed to have been gouged by a giant trowel, leaving a jagged face of gray, topaz, and scarlet. "I've camped here once before," she remarked, slowing Stella to a trot and steering her onto a sandy scrub pan. "My bones feel a rainstorm coming on, so we'll be grateful for the shelter of this cave tonight, methinks." Looks more like a burrow than a cave, Asperity thought, realizing she would have to crawl inside. A rock-chewing worm as big as Stella seemed to have tunneled it. "Are you sure it's safe?" Shiakokwi grinned. "Looks like the perfect place for a bear to curl up, doesn't it? But nay, I've marked the place, and animals avoid it." She didn't elaborate, and Asperity was left to speculate about how such a cave could be marked. She guessed that it was probably by scent, some herbal tincture that had the same effect as an animal's urine, demarking territory. Crawling in after Shiakokwi, she found that the oval recess opened up overhead, at least enough for them to sit upright. Asperity, realizing she'd have to sleep without a pillow on the scree-littered floor, thought of her bed in Farcellane. Her life there may have been devoid of emotional warmth, but it hadn't lacked comfort. The contrast flushed her with the ache of rootlessness, and she suddenly felt that she'd been catapulted into a world that had, thus far, made no space for her. As if sensing her distress and seeking to ease it in an oblique way, Shiakokwi approached her as she settled her head against her pack. The older woman handed her a few sheets of paper and a thin stick of charcoal. "Once we get to my home, I'll give you a proper journal," she said, "but this will do for the next couple of nights. Make it your priority, child. First thing upon arising tomorrow, write down everything you can recall of your dreams." "Where is your home?" Asperity was startled to realize she hadn't asked this yet. So much had happened in so short a time. It's a portion of the El Makora underworld. Only a handful of Shani could ever access it, and of those only I remain. It was a Sophrine refuge. The entrance is near the peak of Mount Veneer. We ought to reach it in a fortnight. Asperity absorbed this with a wordless "oh." It at least confirmed Shiakokwi's stature in her mind, as she knew the portals within El Makora required a nuanced command of sacred timbre to open. Being the daughter of a city father made her privy to such information. Nevertheless, a new dimension of insecurity and doubt opened within her. So I am going to be living underground. For how long? Records in Farsalane attested that Ophia's crust was honeycombed with tunnel networks, some even passing under the ocean from continent to continent, joining her homeland with Chan and lands farther east. The Shani had worked differently during the season when El Makora was tunneled. They'd sensed the shifts and movements Ophia leaned towards, and then encouraged these, forming their underworld's architecture around the bedrock's wishes. In the process, they discovered that much of the area within Ophia's mantle was already spacious. Asperity's ruminations conjured Papa's recent words in the library. Too long have we ceded the sunlit lands to the primitives. This general sentiment had inspired the Shani to begin building hives above ground, beginning in places inaccessible as eagles' eyries and sealed behind doors invisible to those who didn't know what to look for. Even the inhabitants of the lush province of Lenore, who traded extensively with the Osquai, lived high in the Conhuera Mountains. Farsalane had been tantamount to an act of aggression, a declaration of dominance. Here is a Shani settlement you can assail, if you dare. Does anyone's pride justify such risks, Papa? But Asperity was asleep before she could imagine his reply. Her last dream was so vivid that, even after she opened her eyes, it seemed to superimpose its lambency upon her tiny cave refuge. She was only vaguely aware of the verdant sense of the night's rainfall, or of Shiakokwi cooing affection to her mare. Without once thinking of food or tea, Asperity set one of the papers her mentor had given her upon a knee, took the charcoal pencil in hand, and began writing. The earliest entry point I remember was a sandbar made wet by a creek trickling from a cave mouth. I didn't think to pause, turn around, and see the dream's history unfurl. I was too caught up in wonder, the kind of wonder one seldom knows except in the most rapturous states. There was magic inside that cave, the promise of something miraculous. Shiakokwi stood beside me and seemed to guess my emotion. She smiled. I noticed for the first time that her eyes were the brown of rich loam. They were wide with revelation. The ache in her back and neck from the night's uncompromising bed was rivaled only by the throb of her saddle-sore inner thighs. But the elation of dream recall swept Asperity along. Only in dreams will I ever discuss matters of consequence with other Ophians, Shiakokwi said. The cordon has too many ears. Ah, look at you, child. I dare say you've never known the savor of life in a free realm. But we must make do. We're free here, are we not? No weaving carries our words and deeds to eavesdroppers. Our souls are at liberty to breathe. And so, focus. Remember where and who you are. But the bars, I said. And it's as if saying it made it so, because suddenly I could see them, Iron bars so thick I could barely get my hands around them. They formed an impenetrable barrier across the cave opening. You see, even here, where we are free of our bodies, we are conditioned by body consciousness, my mentor told me. We recall our limitations in the physical world and drag those ideas along like shackles. Remember who you are. Remember whose dream this is. Are you to be cowed by what your own mind created? As soon as she said this, I realized I had been wavering and losing self-awareness. Asperity paused and allowed herself a moment's satisfaction. However she read the dream's outcome, it felt like a breakthrough for her, a significant step forward. When I regained full awareness, I understood the truth of what she told me. The bars were no more real than anything else I could imagine. There could have been a row of ibises or a trail of rocks across that cave mouth. So when I reached forward, guided by this knowledge, my hand passed as easily as through a water curtain. I took a step, felt the illusory bars slide through me, and with another step I was inside. I don't know what lay inside that cave because I woke up as soon as I crossed over. But maybe that's the point. I'd seized all the wonder I could hold. When she read what she'd written down to Shiakokwi, the old woman merely said, "Sit with it, child, and see what it reveals to you. Our road will give you ample time for such a meditation." The thirsty ground was already drying as they departed. Stella seemed heartened now by her proximity to home. Growth was sparse and seldom higher than the mare's knees. She needed no trails. With a belly full of morning oats, she dove in and out of gullies and leapt over meadow humps with no muscle-tensing hesitation. Soon, Asperity was eyeing the jagged mountain that rose to a bald knob of rock reminiscent of a spiral tower. Mount Veneer was the tallest culmination of the Canhuera ridgeline, which eventually grazed the head of Ilrea province, her homeland. The following afternoon they reached the mountain's knees. A path snaked 2/3 of the way to the naked summit in stairway increments. They were forced to dismount there so Shiakokwi could guide her mare by hand. The breeze felt poignant, even desolate, pouring from the Canhuera peaks. 2 hours later, they reached the edge of a wall of sagging firs and pine. These trees marked the beginning of an ascent that tolerated no clear paths. The land was preternaturally quiet, the foothills brooding over ancient memories. The two toiled amongst the trees for another hour, Shiakokwi finding natural routes up and through the silent land. Pines gradually diminished in number and size. Then the pair rose above the timberline, and the air cooled. They finally stopped atop a rock ledge that commanded a breathtaking view of the land they'd just traversed. "We should sleep here," Shiakokwi counseled. "Tomorrow, we negotiate the path to its western face, wherein the entrance lies. At this vantage we'll know of any pursuit. You go ahead, child. I'll keep the first watch." At first, Asperity perceived only flames. Then, a molten sphere filled Ophia's heart. Her shell shuddered and split into deep veins. Imponderable chasms opened. The sea rushed into every fresh channel. Lakes spilled. Mountains tumbled over one another. The whole world was ocean and tempest. Waves stung Hesperides' eyes and filled her mouth with a bite of salt. She witnessed hives sunk below leagues of murky waters. Fish meandered through their archways and darted when they saw their reflections in shiny mirrors. Hesperides nearly forgot that she could let this sensation pass through her, that she didn't have to drown. I'm dreaming. That was fortunate, for no flesh of the waking world could withstand squalls such as these, or this sea's intimate cruelty and vehemence. Ophia was sealed over, and the roiling waters left no suggestion that any civilization had ever stood there. As she was pulled under, Hesperides' sky became twilight aquamarine. Then she was tossed once more up into the gale. This was the mother of all storms. My storm, she reminded herself. I shall claim ownership. Never give your power away to any environment, in waking or in dreaming, Xiaocoqui had cautioned her. Reminded of her power to direct her dream, Hesperides hovered high above the waves. A misty raven bore witness to all this beside her. It, too, had sought shelter in the heavens. Hesperides and the ethereal bird hovered together far above the havoc and cacophony. Who can say what names will be given to this new land? The raven mused. Ophia, she writes herself, seeking balance. Sarpienta, lying coiled in her heart, turns in his bed. No more substantial than smoke, it floated like a tadpole in water, occasionally thrashing its wings to stay aloft. This is your dream, so you and this seascape are one. Somehow, it tossed approval at her like a beak thrust. You didn't even need me to help you awaken to the fact. No actual words were spoken. Its communications, like its male timbre, were simply known to Hesperides. It never even moved its mouth except to form a slight rictus smile. I believe in you. You would not be here if you couldn't master this tempest. Hesperides clenched her fists, deepening her concentration, and translucent quartz solidified from the howling air, forming an egg-shaped barrier. Its crystal walls shielded them from the gale, and the ensuing silence staggered her. Impressive, human. The raven sounded proud, yet its expression was dour. But now you must witness other storms in other places. Hesperides awoke with ears ringing, a gulf of unimaginable depth echoing the clamor of 1,000 trumpets. This time, she had no time to write her dream down or even reflect upon it for long. In dawn's scarlet hour, Xiaocoqui alerted her to movement over the grasslands. Squinting eastwards, Hesperides identified at least a score of riders in Pharsalane military regalia. They were no farther than a mile from Veneer's feet and pushing their horses hard. Even at that distance, Hesperides sensed Papa's timbre. Pallades rode at the head of the wedge. Xiaocoqui frowned at the scene below. It was the first time Hesperides had seen her appear truly perplexed. He came for you himself, she remarked. This is startling. I had not anticipated. Why should he not come for me himself? Hesperides asked. I am his daughter. Shiakokwi's glance was piercing, with just a hint of reproach. Let's not indulge in fantasies about what your life with him has been like for all these years, child. If I were to summarize its character in one word, that word would be cold. That may not be the truth of his heart, but it's a fair account of his deeds. Asperity's expression was equally sharp. How long have you been watching me? Long enough to know that you've ached to run away since you moved to Farsalane, Shiakokwi said. In the capital, you felt your father's emotional aloofness mirrored by everyone else around you. Only in Sequana did you have friends, and even there they were few. She drew closer, and Asperity tensed, perhaps sensing the coming revelation that would smite her core. But you could never bring yourself to run away, could you? Because that would rob you of your chance to atone, to keep sacrificing yourself to discharge your essential debt, living on after your mother's death. Shiakokwi allowed that to settle, then drew even closer. She tried to invest her voice with compassion, but the anger she felt towards the girl's self-condemnation lent it a steely edge. If those bars within your dream, the ones keeping you from the treasure that is your birthright, if they could speak, they'd no doubt say, "What must I do to justify my existence?" Child, I know why you cannot recall your mother's face except from paintings and dreams. She did not survive your birth, and you believe it's your fault. Fat tears rolled down Asperity's cheeks. She could scarcely enunciate. It is not fair that you know so much. You may be right, Shiakokwi conceded. Ophia is in peril, and my fear for her sometimes makes me rash. But what is even less fair, an even greater violation, is the harm you've done yourself trying to expiate for something that was not your doing. To blame an infant for the death of an adult? I have to find a way to make up for what he lost, the young woman wailed. Shiakokwi shook her head. Now her empathy was plain. Whichever course you choose, let us hope you never succeed in that ambition. Your father attaining everything he thinks he wants? I doubt any circumstance could hurt him worse. This finally penetrated Asperity because it so closely echoed what she had long suspected amid her heart's tangle of secrets. Her subservience and practiced acquiescence to a creed and vision not congenial to her diminished her and Papa. Her self-sacrifice purchased nothing of value for either of them. She gazed down at Pallades again as he shouted orders to his men. Ignorant of the trails Shiakokwi had found, they'd begun to dismount and approach the crag at the mountain's sternum, which was too steep and riddled with loose shale for the animals to negotiate. Shiakokwi intertwined her fingers to show how all worlds were bound, one to another. The movement drew Asperity's attention. Ultimately, the power of love and belief drives the universe. You were right to feel daunted by all this, my dear girl. As a Sophrine, a wakeful dreamer, as a sower of dreams, you'll be responsible for the welfare of every world. But all beings, if they are honest with themselves, must acknowledge that this is true for them. She squinted at her apprentice for a moment and then slowly smiled. I see you have already arrived at one of the most crucial lessons in all of this. To forge these connections requires something more than sensitivity and attunement. you must have empathy. And because you cannot know where you will forge your relationships, but can only seek and hope, you must hold this empathy for all beings. Yes, I see that, Asperity said. One cannot pursue greed, hate, or dominance with a Sophrein's vision. Try to exercise it in the service of such base desires, and you'll reap frustration time and again, Xiaokokwi said. This is why the Sophrein's have always been marked by their depths of compassion. Who else would ever want to step into this role? This vocation holds out few rewards for the selfish. The depths of compassion, Asperity echoed, and she felt a flutter in the pit of her being, knowing that even now her thoughts and energy reverberated on the other side of many camouflage veils. Once she was seen, it would be too late for choice. "What would you have me do?" she whispered. She was so fixated on the approaching soldiers that she didn't notice how Xiaokokwi's eyes sharpened. "What would you do?" the woman said. "Where would your heart guide you if you heeded its voice rather than the voices of doubt and guilt? The voices that say, 'How can I atone for my mother losing her life, bringing me into this world?'" That swung Asperity about again, but for a moment she was too outraged and bristling with other unnameable emotions to speak. Child, that voice. The voice that lies and tells you that anyone could ever be your victim. You create your reality, not your mother's or your father's or that of anyone else in Farsalane or of Ophia entire. If you really want to serve anyone, there's only one way to do it. Fulfill yourself. So I'll ask you again, what do you want? That penetrated the young woman. Suddenly, she was gripped by the irrational fear that if she could not find a way to speak past the rising lump in her throat, she might never find her voice again. "Let me give you one last nudge," Xiaokokwi said. "Have you not wondered why it was so easy for us to flee Farsalane?" This dislodged some of Asperity's voice. "What do you mean? You had to drug me and we spoke in signs. You call that easy?" "We're talking about the cordon," Xiaokokwi said. "I doubt anyone outside their circle really knows the extent of their powers, but I'll wager your knowledge runs deeper than most. Nay, it would have been a trifling task to catch us had your father's heart really been in it. So this was my great gamble. You see, I believe that, in his heart of hearts, Pallades Monsequana understands that the order to which he's devoted his life will eventually betray his ideals. He sees that the harm is too steep a price for the slim peace and security they've purchased. I believe he made such a sloppy effort to forbid my presence in the city and prevent your leaving it, because a part of him wants the cordon to fail." With a wrench of effort, Asperity turned and faced the rising shadows that demarked the men's progress. The mouth of darkness yelled her name at times. Other times, it hurled curses at Xiaokokwi, which being the kindest of them. Asperity focused on the stiff, gesticulating figure at the head of their wedge. Finally, she found a point of stability and conviction on which to stand. Her teacher's empathetic view, which was so congenial to her heart, swayed her. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. "You have to serve Ophia in your way. I must now serve it in mine. May we both find our condign paths. You can help me escape, even now?" she asked Shayakokwi. I can, the other woman averred. Is that your wish? As if acceding to the weight of the mountain upon which she stood, Asperity nodded. Yes. Then I will confound their pursuit with the timbres of fog. With that, Shayakokwi retrieved something Asperity hadn't noticed before. A grapefruit-sized dried gourd with fire-blackened edges around its stem where its top had been cut. The woman removed this top to reveal a hollow packed with dried herbs. She seemed to coax these contents to life with erratic and barely audible snatches of tune. Suddenly, a finger-wide flame burst from inside. Shayakokwi, eyes now closed, continued to mutter over this flame as if encouraging a living, responsive being. Smoke began pouring from the gourd, thickening as it expanded. Something lent it weight, making it sag towards the ground rather than dissipating in the subalpine air. Now Shayakokwi cupped a fount of milky froth, which spilled about the two Shani until Asperity could no longer see her moccasins. The world relaxed its hold upon her mind. Time grew lethargic, forgetting its strident march toward a nebulous future. Asperity felt the creeping edges of numbed repose that reminded her of the effect of the herbal chew Shayakokwi had given her as they fled Farsalane. The fog poured over the slope below them. Asperity was so engrossed in this eldritch wonder that she forgot about the approaching men. Her sense of ease deepened into profound insouciance. She wanted to float along the white spectral fingers to some unknowable destination. The froth filled crevices and ravines, rendering the ground invisible. A veritable cloud descended towards Mount Veneer's knees, though the two women could still peer up at a clear starlit sky. Asperity, standing on the fringes of the fog's influence, felt as if she'd strayed into a waking dream. Concepts like surrender and flight lost their meaning. How would it be for the men down there? Yes, she remembered them now. They strode right into the midst of the creeping, milky tendrils. In moments, their cries filled the lower wood. They seemed to call to one another as if a gulf of worlds separated them. Shayakokwi's voice grew frenetic as if she argued with latent shadows. Then, as her chant reached its crescendo, her eyes snapped open. There, let them wander like phantoms till the moon is high. Hard to follow a mountain trail when you can't recall what a mountain is. Oh, try to peer this veil with your foul weaving. Come, child, let's not squander the time I've purchased us. Swatting a vagrant trail of fog from her face, Asperity nodded and, taking a few tentative steps, made her first true concession to her life's new calling.